What a race we have for the Group of 5 spot in the New Year's 6 bowl situation. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the American Conference Championship game. Of course, a matchup we saw just a few days ago with Cincinnati falling at Memphis, and the two teams get back together. Same place, same stadium, Tigers and Bearcats. We got Steve Helwick on the line from SB Nation to help us break it down. You can join Steve at Underdog Dynasty and also Hustle Belt. Steve, how are we doing tonight?
We're doing well. This is going to be a great game. High stakes, potential Cotton Bowl appearance on the line for both teams, which have never been to a New Year's Six Bowl in the modern playoff format. So it'll be a new face after UCF dominated that conference for 2 years, and we'll get our first non-UCF team since 2016 Western Michigan in a New Year's Six Bowl. Western Michigan played in the Cotton Bowl, and that is the bowl game this year designated for the Group of 5.
Of course, we've had UCF emerge as an undefeated team the past few seasons to take on LSU and Auburn at the Peach Bowl and the Fiesta Bowl. Even the years preceding that, it was fairly clear-cut with Boise State against Arizona. We had an UCF Baylor matchup as well a few years before that. Houston, of course, had a nice showing against Florida State. The Group of 5 number 1 team has been fairly decided before this point in the season, but man, it is a mad scramble right now when you consider Memphis at 11-1, Cincinnati at 10-2, and of course, even though the Tigers get the win last weekend by 10, they pretty much have to back it up with another win to get the Group of 5 matchup. And then even if these teams don't really have a shot, they've certainly made it interesting, Steve. When you talk App State at 11-1, Navy could finish at 10-2. They've got a couple games left. Of course, they've got, Army in a couple weeks, and SMU at 10-2, Boise at 11-1. But as you explained to me and we discussed before we started to record, it's pretty much an American Conference Championship game for the bid, with Boise State factoring in as well.
Yes, that is my belief. Some people might think that Boise State still has a shot, and I could understand that. Boise State is currently 19th in the rankings. Cincinnati is 20th. I would think that Cincinnati beating Memphis, who is ranked above their ranked team right now, I feel like that win would do more than Boise State beating Hawaii, a team they already had beaten 59-37 this year. And I think that this American title game is for the Cotton Bowl. There can be arguments, debates, which I will accept and listen to. I do think that the American is the strongest Group of 5 conference this year, and I think that they're at their strongest mark that they've been since the conference really formed in 2013. They outplayed the ACC this year, and for times they outplayed the Pac-12 even, except for Oregon and Utah, which were the only 2 Pac-12 teams that finished with less than 4 losses. The American is, when UCF's your 5th best team at 9-3, and above that you have Navy, SMU, Cincinnati, Memphis. Then your 6th best team's an 8-4 Temple with 2 Power 5 wins. I just think that this conference is really good across the board. So I'll start with saying some points for Cincinnati. Is Tulsa is a 4-8 team in the American Conference. 2 of Tulsa's wins are over a 7-win Wyoming team from the Mountain West and a 5-win San Jose State team from the Mountain West. 2 teams that Boise State beat by 1 possession are the San Jose State game. I'm not sure off the top of my head if it was 1 possession exactly, but I know it was close throughout the contest. And the Wyoming game was in overtime. And also, one of Cincy's wins is over South Florida, a team that had beaten BYU, which is Boise's only loss. Now, Cincinnati had, I guess it's a benefit here. They had the benefit of playing number 1 Ohio State, even though they got tossed 42-0. It seems like that game doesn't really count as much because Ohio State is just so powerful and has beaten every team by 20 or more points this year, except for Penn State, who they beat by 11. So Cincinnati had really their first loss of the season last week to Memphis, losing 34-24, and playing with their backup quarterback, Ben Bryant. They did not even have Desmond Ridder for the game, who was out with a shoulder injury and should be set to return for Saturday's game. So there are a lot of interesting storylines going with Cincinnati into the game. Now, this whole Cincinnati-Boise argument can just end if Memphis, the favorite, who won by 10 points in the Liberty Bowl last week, hasn't lost a home game all season, and their only loss this year was a 2-point controversial loss to Temple, which we touched on in an earlier show. But Memphis, all they have to do is win, and they're in the Cotton Bowl. So Tigers have a very simple path this Saturday.
When you look at the matchups, Steve, how much do you think the addition of Ritter this week, who, of course, as you mentioned, and I caught this game last week in Memphis, will make a difference in regards to his style, his productivity versus the backup in the game for Cincinnati last week?
Ritter's really good at moving around the pocket. He has good footwork, and he's a veteran. He had started 24 straight games for Cincinnati, and over that time period, he had 3 total losses. One was an overtime to Temple, one was to last year's 12-1 UCF team, and the other one was to this year's undefeated Ohio State team. He's really good at leading the offense. Cincinnati can be inconsistent in that regard at times, but he's a great passer, and he also does a lot with his feet too, which Ben Bryant didn't exactly provide last week, and he probably has just more confidence and veteran experience than Bryant, who had been starting his first game as a Bearcat last week. Now, Bryant didn't perform badly by any means, but he did have 2 interceptions last game and threw for like 230 yards, I think, around that mark. Ritter this year, he's throwing about double the amount of touchdowns as interceptions. He's also contributed over 400 rushing yards to the Bearcats this year, and that adds another threat on those 3rd and short, 3rd and long plays where you have to watch for Ritter rather than just cover the receiver. So I think Cincinnati gains an advantage in that regard. But playing on the road in the Liberty Bowl is going to be tough. The Liberty Bowl set an attendance record for the American Conference this year, getting around 60,000 for that game day game against SMU. It's going to be packed. It's not Thanksgiving weekend anymore. People are back at school. And it's going to be a huge game in Memphis. I'm sure Beale Street will be loaded just with the thought of the Cotton Bowl being there. So it's going to be a difficult environment for Cincinnati to play in. And Cincinnati's offense has struggled in some road games this year. South Florida, they had to get by on a game-winning field goal. They only scored 2 touchdowns in that game. They really had to come back in that one. So Cincinnati's offense needs to be better prepared to compete with Memphis's explosiveness and their skill players that they offer, like the Kenneth Gainwells, DeMonte Coxies, and Antonio Gibsons, those guys that will just catch the ball and just run lightning quick to the end zone. Memphis has so many good skill players. They're so tough to guard, and Cincinnati's going to have to match that pound for pound offensively.
This has been one of the more dynamic, exciting, and fun championship games that we've seen in recent years in college football. Certainly with Central Florida over the last few years. They had a shootout against South Florida just a few years ago. That was a whole lot of fun, close to 50 points. Of course, these two teams didn't play a shootout, but a competitive game in which the Tigers proved to be decidedly better. Cincinnati got back in the game late. You mentioned Ritter coming back, being an additional dimension, providing that in the running game. You mentioned Gainwell for Memphis. Of course, on the other side, we got Michael Warren, who's a dynamic back for Cincinnati. Should be a whole lot of fun with a lot of playmakers on the field, a lot of speed on the field.
Yeah, I think with the running back matchup, Warren versus Gainwell, that this game should just be an excellent one to watch. It's competing with the SEC championship game, which is tough, but if that SEC championship game gets a blowout, even if it's not, I recommend that everyone has this game on the screen just because Gainwell is so fun to watch, and so is Warren. Just to get the ball, they're 2 of the better halfbacks in the nation. And one other factor we have to consider into this game is Memphis' special teams. Through the past 4 years, they have more kickoff return touchdowns than any team in the country. They have 11. And they got their 11th on the opening kickoff against Cincinnati on Black Friday, and they had one against SMU this year. Teams are scared to kick to Memphis, which is giving Memphis great starting field position, and that's exactly how you don't want to operate with the Tigers with their offense. Now, Cincinnati did a better job defensively than most teams do on Memphis. Cincinnati has a pretty good defense. They notably broke UCF's NCAA record 30-point scoring streak earlier this season, and they only held Memphis to 34 points, which is well below the Tigers' season average. Brady White, who'd been on a roll throwing for like 340 yards in 4 of his previous 5 games, White was held to under 300 yards passing, and he didn't have his best game. So Cincinnati's defense does do a little to rattle the Tigers, but the Tigers still are loaded offensively with all the firepower they have in the rushing and the passing game. And this year is interesting for Memphis because the last 2 years they've had to go on the road in these AIC championship games, try to upset UCF. And both times they came extremely close. They lost in double overtime in 2017 and 2018. They blew a 17-point lead and lost the game to Daryl Mack, UCF's backup quarterback. So this year, Memphis gets to play it at home in its own environment. They've won the first matchup. In the previous years, they had lost that first matchup in the game. So if they can get this done twice, they'll have something really special ahead of them, which is Alabama or Utah or Baylor, Penn State, somebody waiting for them in the Cotton Bowl.
Similar to the Big Ten and the Big 12, we will have a rematch on Conference Championship weekend in the American, with Cincinnati traveling back to Memphis to take on the Tigers. Unlike those two conferences, of course, we've got an interesting back-to-back situation, which the same two teams are playing in the span of just 7 days. And again, as Steve outlined off the top, it's only logical to think winner takes all right here, with Memphis in the lead in regards to the college football playoff rankings right now at 17, 11-1. They would get the quality win additionally against Cincinnati, who comes in at 10-2. If the Bearcats win at 10-2, ranked 20th, do they get the jump over Boise State, who's taking on a 9-4 Hawaii team, even though the Broncos have just the one loss? That could be intriguing. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by. Of course, you can catch Steve and the rest of the staff there at SB Nation on Underdog Dynasty and Hustle Belt, covering both MAC football and the Group of Five. Steve, we appreciate the time.
Thank you. Looking forward to all the games this weekend.